All right, so welcome to everybody. This is a 4-week series about what it means to be Baptist. And we're doing something a little different. I've taught this many times, but we're taping it. And thank you for being the live audience, Matt, the masses here. But we will be sharing this with people, many people, prospects, and new members through the years. So very much appreciate Earl Spell coming to tape this for us. So if you ask questions, which I want you to do, I may repeat the questions just for the sake of this. So let's jump in. Tonight we're talking about the origins of Baptists. So it's a 4-week series. I always like to ask the question when we get started. So for the viewing audience, we have about 6 or 8 of us here. How many of you are from non-Baptist backgrounds for most of your growing up time and all? Okay. 2 out of the 8 or so, which is a little unusual in this church. We have found probably through the years, I would bet at least 30 to 40% of our new members now are from non-Baptist backgrounds. So, but as I hope you'll find out, even if you're from a Baptist background, I think you're going to learn some things in this series that you probably didn't know about. And so for the overview of the 4 weeks, what we will do, like I always say, we kind of start way out here tonight. And quite frankly, you never should say this when you're a speaker, but I'll say it anyway. Tonight is the least interesting night for most people. You're not supposed to say that, but we're going to talk history tonight. But each week we're going to bring it more and more into focus so that by the 4th week, really the 3rd and 4th week, we're really going to be talking a lot about specifically Wake Forest Baptist Church. So if you just kind of hang in there tonight, and because tonight is more about history, I read a lot. Once I start next week in the 3rd and 4th week, I don't have to read a thing hardly. The 3rd week and 4th week, I've lived it, so I can just talk that kind of way. But tonight we want to talk about the origins of Baptists. And the first thing I always like to say, sometimes it gets a chuckle, but I say it for a reason because there really are people who think this. Baptists did not start with John the Baptist. Okay? Let's just put that out to rest. We do not have any direct blood lineage right back to John the Baptist. Just no connection whatsoever. So just get that straight. The origins of Baptists are somewhat hard to pin down, quite frankly. We're going to hear, there's kind of different little pockets here and there. There's no just one thing you say, there it is. Drive a stake in the ground, Baptist started. But there's kind of a movement. But most historians would trace it to 17th century England. That's kind of a starting point. And again, I'm going to tonight read more than not. Next few weeks won't be that at all. The Reformation, which we are inheritance, is that a word? We inherited the Reformation. So it stirred many people back in the Reformation to seek the spiritual renewal of the Church of England. And from among those Puritans, which we know about from the Thanksgiving and Puritans, Plymouth and all that, came the separatists who left the church because they saw no hope that there really was going to be any reform of any significance. So they found their own churches. One of the things I kind of just have a interesting little appreciation is that Baptists were separatists in many ways. I mean, it was called the separatist movement, and they've been dividing ever since. I mean, it just seems like that's one of the things about Baptists, and we're going to even see that tonight as it evolves. There's continually a new movement, and even to this literally day that we're a part of is the Wake Forest Baptist Church. But anyway, so the separatists found their own church because again, they didn't think the Church of England was going to really be reforming what was hoped for. So Baptists were dissenters from the very beginning. It's just kind of in our DNA. The original Baptists rebelled against what they saw as the corruption of the Anglican Church and its affiliation with the English government. I know this is getting kind of dry, but you just got to hang in there with me. Next of all, so these who were separating, the dissenters, now they split from the separatists. I mean, you got a separatist, and now the group separating from the separatists, because they felt like they were distancing themselves too far from the Church of England. So you got one group of things, there's no hope for reform. Another group says they're doing too much too quickly and all this kind of thing. And so they dissent even among themselves. And so 1610 is one of those high water marks. The little Baptist church had split itself over the validity of baptism. And this is really the reason we're called Baptists. I mean, it's about so much of what the Baptist origins, as we're going to hear, is about the view of baptism. What is the appropriate view? So what happened was, and again, we're talking around 1610 here. Persecution drove some of them out of England. Why was there persecution? Because the Church of England, as is somewhat true, not totally, but it wasn't just a religious church, it was the state church. I mean, you had to toe the line. You couldn't just not be a part of it. So it drove them out of England because they weren't going to adhere to the Church of England's policies, but also they didn't feel there was hope for reform. So a group led by a former Anglican church clergyman named John Smyth, S-M-Y-T-H, along with another one named Thomas Helwys. Anybody heard of Smith and Helwys? Does that ring a bell with anybody around here? That's what our literature now is, the curriculum that we have is from the publishing house called Smith and Helwys, which was started back in the 1980s. But that's who it was named after. The first Baptist ministers, John Smith and Thomas Helwys. So they deserted England, were persecuted, ran out of England. They settled in Amsterdam. And there they adopted believers' baptism, which is what we are all about. And they adopted it from, where they kind of got this from was the Mennonites, which is interesting, I think. Again, all these groups, Mennonites now, are all part of what we call the Reformation movement, So by 1611, part of this church in Amsterdam now returns back to England, settling outside of London and calling itself a Baptist church. Everybody's still with me? We're just kind of going all over. So the church baptized only believers, but what's interesting, but not by immersion. Sprinkled. It's interesting, in Baptist history, we always assume everybody's just dunked. There are instances of churches in the desert that literally, because water was so scarce, baptized by sand. Or here they baptized by sprinkling. So, but the point was not so much the mode of baptism, but it was that you were a believer's baptism. That you made a conscious, as we do here, conscious decision. Unlike infant baptism, obviously, which we honor in this church, and we'll get to that another night. But believer's baptism, the core of it was, you see, the Church of England, just like now, Anglican Church, Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, all these, infant baptism. They came along and said, no, we believe the New Testament model for baptism should be believer's baptism, that you make a conscious decision to enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay, so what year was it they went back to England? They went back to England in 1611.
Didn't they go to Amsterdam in 1611?
They went to Amsterdam, I think, in 1610, I believe. So they weren't there long. 1610 to Amsterdam, 1611 back to a small group back to England, and they were for the first time in England now practicing believers' baptism. So now other Baptist congregations spread in the years following, and by 1644, Baptist churches began baptizing by immersion. in accordance with their understanding of the New Testament practice. So that, which obviously continues to this day. That's the first time we see this is the practice that everybody adopted. And again, you would have people, as I still say to children or anybody today, we as Baptists believe that's, Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. We think, that's, that he was lowered and raised up, heard a voice from heaven. So, there is this New Testament model that we get this from. It didn't just come out of nowhere at all. So, fast forward. Want to move over from the old world to the new world, to America. Okay, we're going to talk now about Baptists in America, the start of Baptists in America. This is a little bit easier to put a pin on and kind of be more specific. Many of you who know your American history know that the Puritans and many others came to this country, I want to say for many reasons. I don't want to get into the argument about whether this is a Christian country. But some were prisoners who came just to get them out of the prisons and in the old world. But some came for religious reasons, very much so. And Massachusetts was a Puritan colony where a rigid Christianity was legally enforced. Underscore, legally enforced. So if you know your American history, you got over here, the very things that they were trying to flee from, they ended up establishing once again. So it's hard to break. Same thing. Yes, Jamestown. Yes, I'm from Virginia. There's no question the real first Thanksgiving took place in Virginia. We all know that. But people in Massachusetts, they want to believe that, they can. Yeah, but we know it really happened in Virginia. So that's just a little side commentary for. So in the Puritan colony, Massachusetts, what's interesting is its leaders were as hostile to new ideas as were those church leaders back in Europe. It's just hard to break old habits and old ways of doing things. And I'm getting off subject here, but we always joke about the 7 most common words in a Baptist church. We've never done it that way before. Or this is the way we've always done it, which is saying the same thing. And there you are. But anyway, a young English separatist minister named Roger Williams, he came to Massachusetts and insisted upon preaching according to his conscience, and that the members of the church be allowed to practice according to conscience. And so he came to Massachusetts, and he was banished from the colony. That still wouldn't fly. You still couldn't have freedom of religion when you really got down to it. So with land that was purchased from the Indians, Roger Williams founded Rhode Island in 1636. It secured, 1636. It secured religious freedom for its citizens. So that was the first place. When Massachusetts and all the Puritans came over, there really still was not but so much religious freedom. Rhode Island was the first one where it became okay. In deciding that Baptist beliefs were consistent with his own, Williams was immersed in a Baptist kind of way now by immersion, and he founded the First Baptist Church of Providence, Rhode Island. If you go in 1639, if you go to Providence, Rhode Island now, this church is still in existence. Very first Baptist church on American soil, founded by Roger Williams, Providence, Rhode Island, 1639. Okay, so other Baptists who came from England, these Baptist churches in England, as well as now new converts in the colonies, began, as Baptists do, they began establishing new churches. We know our American history, things up in New England or Jamestown, but obviously the colonies along the East Coast, the 13 colonies, the Southeast, particularly people spread, moved to new territories, and as they did, they began new churches where they went.
I'm
sorry.
Said that he was preaching from conscience.
Yeah.
And that was breaking. What were they teaching?
Oh gosh. Well, I think I don't know. So the question is, for taping purposes, the question is what Roger Williams, I said, was preaching from conscience. It was banned from the colony because of that. What was he teaching that led to him being banned? I don't know. Although one thing for sure is that he was preaching against, being what the membership of the Church of England, the Anglican Church, required. In other words, that as a citizen, I have to be faithful to that church. Which
That's primarily what I was asking, was it the Anglican Church teachings that they brought over?
yeah,
Even though
yes.
they were trying to,
Yeah, the Puritans brought that over. And I don't know the exact answer. It's a good question. I'll look it up because and these are good questions because I've had several, maybe it's even this one, but several sessions I've had where I literally emailed them the next morning my old church history professor. That's a good question, so I'll try to get on that. I would guess, though, that like with so many of these things, one thing was that they weren't willing to go along with the Church of England, kind of thing, in terms of taxes, that kind of thing. I mean, even the Boston Tea Party was somewhat related to all that, so. Anyway, he founded the first church in Providence, Rhode Island. People started expanding in the colonies. It's interesting that where religious freedom was denied most frequently was Massachusetts and Virginia. I mean, you go to Williamsburg today, like probably most of you have. Bruton Parish Church is still there. That's the old Anglican church there in that town. Well, at that time, again, I don't even know all the answers to your question, Larry, but I do know that to be a part of the church, you had to pay taxes. It was just like as a citizen, like we're having to do next week. So Baptists, especially in Massachusetts, Virginia, they were fined for their conscience. They were beaten and they were jailed. And so between the years of 1767 and 1776, which is a date we all know what that means in history, 42 Baptist ministers in Virginia alone were imprisoned for preaching without a license from the state church. See, that's what I'm talking about. Everything was controlled by the church in a very legal way. It's like your citizenship. And I'm from Virginia, so if you go to the Virginia Baptist Historical Society, which is on the campus of the University of Richmond, where I graduated, but their most prized relic is the key to the jail in Culpeper, Virginia, where John Leland, who was a Baptist minister, was jailed for religious persecution. So there were 40, over these number of years, 42 Baptist ministers. I mean, this is in our country. This is now not over in the old world. And they're still getting put in jail for going against these kind of things.
Well, in Virginia, you had to be a Protestant. You had to pay taxes. So you had to go to church at least once a month or you were fined.
Is that right?
You had to
Yeah.
be 18. You had to be a landowner.
Okay. So there are all these legalistic requirements, whether you believe in God or not. It was a legal thing. It really was. So because of this persecution, John Leland, this is so important, a Virginia Baptist minister, I keep talking about that, he was the driving force behind the First Amendment to the Constitution, the 16 most influential words ever written in support of religious liberty. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, let me just pause for a little bit, and I'm going to come back to this some. But here's your homework for tonight. I'm going to ask you next week, what is the one, so let me back up a little bit and say, bigger picture. I say this to anybody who's joining our church. I've said it, I'd like to have $1 every time. I said there's nothing magical about being Baptist. I said, that we in this church have a great respect for people from other traditions. I have that respect. I always say I'm a Christian first. I'm a Baptist second. And there's a whole lot of branches under that Christian tree. Episcopalian, Lutheran, Methodist, you name it. Very respectful of all those kind of things. So why be a Baptist? Well, like many of us, one reason is because that's where my parents went. You know, a lot of us. A lot of you who came from other churches, maybe not Baptists, are in this church not because we have so exactly the beliefs and doctrine, although it's got to be within a certain range for sure, but it is because you like the worship, traditional worship, you like the music, you like what we have for youth or children, you know, a lot of different things that this is kind of the experience that fit what you were looking for as much as anything. And again, probably even that's not totally perfect any more than it is for me. So what is the unique contribution of Baptists to the world? I don't mean just America, to the world. The unique contribution of Baptists, and it is, you can't put it on anybody else except Baptists, is the championing of religious freedom and separation of church and state. That was John Leland. I just mentioned him. Many people, well, what are the Bill of Rights? Where is separation of church and state? They somewhat very appropriately would say James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, which is true. Where did James Madison and Thomas Jefferson get those ideas from? They got them from John Leland. That's history. That's in any history book that talks about that kind of thing. John Leland, a Baptist minister, was the primary influence on James Madison and Thomas Jefferson to champion to the point that it's now in the Bill of Rights. And I'm going to come back to that. But next week, I'm going to ask you the question, okay, what's the one unique contribution to the world that is uniquely Baptist? And that's the answer. So that's a huge thing. That's something we should celebrate. And I'm going to come back to this because this, trust me, this is a current issue as it was then. I mean, it's something that's continually being challenged, the separation of church and state, religious freedom.
We always been curious, I'd just like to make one correction. That other was in order to vote in Virginia.
Okay. So in order to vote in Virginia, you had to pay the taxes and attend at least a certain amount of time.
Be a Protestant.
Right. Thank you.
That was it.
Thank you. Okay. So we're talking about the colonization of America now. We're in the 1700s of expansion into pioneer territories, frontier, certainly down, especially down the colonies, down the east seaboard. So there are many converts. And then there was a thing in the 18th century that was called the Great Awakening. Actually, it was in the 1800s. The Great Awakening, which was kind of a religious fervor that took place in a kind of almost a national revival, especially in more rural areas. And I'll come back to this, but you can see how this impacted even North Carolina, even where we are. I mean, you look at Wake Forest. You got one Methodist church, maybe two. You got one Presbyterian, maybe two. You got one Lutheran, one Episcopal, one Catholic. And you got dozens of Baptist churches. I mean, just, they're all every other block around here, And what's that?
Because we split all the time.
Well, you came in a little late, I think. He said because we split all the time. That's not as funny as you may think, unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. I always like the story. I mean, not a story, but I always remember going somewhere out in the country, and they had Harmony Baptist Church. That was the name of it. And then right down the block, and you knew it had to be a split, was called New Harmony Baptist Church. And I thought, Harmony, this church was a split from that church. Sometime or another, there was not harmony in Harmony Church. So they had to start a New Harmony Church. And that's somewhere, I can't remember, somewhere here in North Carolina. I just remember seeing that. So you got churches that are, and this part I can talk without notes. You got churches that are somewhat two different traditions. Now, we're talking Baptist churches. In the Great Awakening, 1800s, as things evolved, huge explosion of new Baptist churches just popping up everywhere. bivocational pastors, untrained pastors, and some very much seminary trained pastors. So all in between levels of education and all that. And so out of that became what was called, some Baptist churches were part of what's called the Charleston tradition, and some were part of what's called the Sandy Creek tradition. And these are not hard to identify even today. The tradition Wake Forest Baptist Church is, without question, is we are very much out of the Charleston tradition. And what is that, Charleston tradition? First of all, if you go to First Baptist Church, Charleston, South Carolina, it's the oldest Baptist church in the South, very historic. Charleston tradition would be churches like ours who, and again, there's variances, and it's not, you can't cookie cutter, but more than not would value education. I always said, if I didn't have a doctoral degree, I probably would not have been considered as pastor of this church. That's, you look at all the pastors, most of them had doctoral degrees. Less emotion in worship. We don't do a lot of amen, a lot of clapping, or we do some of that, but it's not the emotional always getting caught up in that kind of thing. More order of worship. We have bulletins and order of worship, choir, even in choir robes, just that kind of thing. Sandy Creek would be, you go just outside of town here, you can find a lot of Sandy Creek churches, typically more rural, not always, but typically more rural, pastors less educated, more emotional in the style of worship kind of thing. I mean, I can walk into church in 5 minutes, and you can too, pretty much tell which, this is more this kind of church or more that kind of church, kind of thing. And please hear me. It's not saying that one is right and one is wrong. We could be Charleston tradition, kind of look down our nose and say, but that's not the point. I mean, education you can be the most educated person in the world and be far away from God. So, but it is just the fact that Baptist churches, they didn't all just follow one kind of style. In fact, and I'll get to this, but so somebody asked me a really good question in one of the other ones, and this is where I went to to my church history professor. Somebody asked a really good question. Why are there so many? It's very true. Why are there so many Baptist churches in the South, but not New England? It's a good question, because it started in New England, started in Rhode Island. We've heard that. Why is it then that there's so many more? If you had a map of the country and put a pin for every Baptist church, when you get about to the Mason-Dixon line, about Maryland, D.C., Northern Virginia, and start going down, you would see a ton of pins going over to about Texas, whole Southeast, Baptist country, Bible Belt, you've heard that called. You get into New England, Midwest, West, you would be scattered to find a Baptist church out there. I mean, just not even remotely the same. And some of y'all probably live in those areas and know how that is. So why is it that when it started there that there's so many more in the South? Here's his answer. I'm just going to read it. The surge in Baptist growth occurred during the first and second Great Awakening of the 18th century. So it was the 18th century. I thought it was 1800s. But, the frontier territories, which at that time were Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Georgia, and most of what is today called the Bible Belt benefited most from that growth. Baptists were particularly adept at thriving in this culture because they did not require a clergy hierarchy to start a church, nor did they require a seminary-educated pastor to lead one. So let's just stop right there. So those are two big reasons right there. We know if anybody's from the Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, whatever, there is a hierarchical system. Methodist district superintendent, bishop, same with Episcopalians, the Synod, and the Lutherans have their districts or whatever. I don't know. So we don't have any of that. And anybody can start. I could go out. I mean, I have education, but I could go out and start a church next week. So all that helped to make it easier to start a Baptist church. As an old saying is, all it takes to start a Baptist church is two people, one to make a motion and the other the second, as long as one is willing to be the preacher. That's an old saying. So a third reason is the identification, and this is just got to be said, the identification of Baptist churches with the post-Civil War culture among whites. Read Theological Defense of Segregation, which is one of the great scars in our Baptist history. But Baptists in the South identified with segregation. They supported it. Many of them owned slaves. We know that from history. And the autonomy of Baptist policy to freed African Americans who created many Baptist congregations. I'll come to this in the fourth week, but Olive Branch Church, black church right across the railroad tracks, was very much a part, came out of our church. Yeah. And many African Baptist churches, because again of this kind of polity, were able to go out and start very much easier than a lot of all these other denominations would be able to. Let me stop for a second. How we doing? Anything questions? Anything confusing? I'm kind of flying right through. I say this, what I'm telling you in 45 minutes here was at least a whole semester in seminary of church history or Baptist history. Anybody have a question or comment? Okay, I just want to, you're not interrupting. I'm about to say please feel free to interrupt. You're not interrupting. Just if you have a question, raise your hand or comment or whatever. So, okay, yeah.
So my question goes, what I haven't heard you said is talking about Calvin.
Oh, okay.
Being a Calvinist.
Yes.
Because when I came through my Baptist training, there was a lot of discussion about our origin coming from a Calvinist point of view.
Yeah.
So I noticed that up until now, we've not really talked about that. So
Right.
asking
The Reformation. The Reformation was very much the two figureheads were Martin Luther and John Calvin. Part of why you haven't heard me say much about it is that it's just in my notes. but I mean, I haven't talked about Martin Luther either. That's kind of pre-Baptist in the sense they started the Reformation, which started the ball rolling to where now the separatists and the Mennonites and the Amish and all these kind of separatists came out of that. So that's really why I haven't. Let me say a word about that, as long as you brought it up. More currently about Calvinism. When I came along in the seminaries in the 1970s, back in the Dark Ages, Calvinism was not taught at all, or in where I went to, which was Southern Seminary, and actually Southeastern. I'm going to come to Southeastern the third week. But Calvinism was not taught as something we believe as Baptists in the seminaries that I went to, which were Southern Baptists, very much so. 6 Southern Baptist seminaries. I was at one of them and eventually 2 of them, was not taught. Nowadays, it's very much has become something that is taught. And let me, all of y'all, like, what's Calvinism? And I don't know all the details. The big thing that gets everybody talking about Calvinism is, shake it all down, is kind of it almost feels a little bit, the part of this controversial is almost feels like predestination. That's the tricky part. And if for old timers like me would never have dreamed that Calvinism would be embraced in any kind of way in a Southern Baptist seminary. And it's still not totally. But the fact that it's being taught at all is shows this changing of the times. But I'm not giving a really good answer, except the quick, easy answer is that Calvin and Martin Luther and all that predated Baptists. So it's before the origin of Baptists. But they if not for them, the Baptist movement would probably not have started, because they did start the Reformation, which got the ball rolling. You know, so
Was Priesthood of the Believer
yes,
a pillar in the separatist movement?
I would say so. Yes.
So it predated the individual freedom of religion. In other words, it was what that was really built on.
I don't know. I'm always want to say, well, I don't know what I don't know because I don't. I'm not a historian. That's why I said, you know, tonight I'm reading more.
But that wasn't,
But
that wasn't a concept that.
that was certainly was not a concept of the Church of England in the Anglican Church. My guess is, and I just leave it as a guess, a pretty good guess, is that when the Reformation began, this was one of the arguments. I mean, the priesthood of the believer came out of the Reformation movement, you know, which is reforming the church as it existed, especially the Catholic Church at that point with the start of the Reformation. Because the Catholic Church was very, as it is still today, very hierarchical. The Pope, they don't believe in the priesthood of the believer. They, or at least church doctrine, they don't. I would say a lot of them probably do, just like they don't believe in simple things in practicality. But the Reformation was the 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg with Martin Luther, and that was one of the things to say we need to have priesthood of the believer, you know, that because that was not practiced before, you know, because of the Catholic beliefs. Does that answer your?
It does. I'm just trying to think of
The sequence.
The mindset during the colonization, and as you're.
Oh, I see. Okay.
In the context of even fast forwarding.
Right.
Civil
Well, and I think when you see this starting to come into play, as I just discussed earlier, in Massachusetts, you end up seeing, once again, the priesthood of believer not being celebrated and allowed. Because really, priesthood of believer is everybody is responsible only to God. It's certainly not responsible to the minister or to the church or certainly not to the government. And all that was going right back into play. So you have a Roger Williams and different others who dissenters in America who are saying, you know, listen, you know, this, you know, we celebrate and we care about priesthood of the believer. So they left and were persecuted for that, you know. So it's kind of, it almost feels like in the old world they had to break away and establish that, and then they came to the new world, they had to break away and establish it again. It feels that way, you know. So, and next week I'm talking about Baptist doctrine. We'll very much talk about the priesthood of believer because that's a foundational Baptist deal, you know, kind of thing. So let me. Okay. We're good. Fast forward. We're in America now. They're colonizing. They're expanding. Starting new Baptist churches. So 1814 is another one of those pivotal years. In 1814, they started what was called the Triennial Convention. Until that time, you know, we have here, and I'll talk about this other times, but well, I'll talk about it today. But you know, for instance, we're affiliated with the Raleigh Baptist Association, CBF of North Carolina, Baptist World Alliance, all these fellowships of other churches. Well, until 1814, there wasn't any of that. Everybody's just kind of on their own doing their thing. So for the very first time, there was a convention that allowed all these churches, if they wanted to, and again, we're talking 1814 where transportation wasn't what it is today and communication or anything, but there was a convention, triennial, which is exactly what it said, met every 3 years. So the very first time that there was any kind of gathering, of fellowshipping, of coming together of Baptist churches and their representatives. Now, that's 1814. Every 3 years. Again, no communication, bad transportation, but an attempt to come together. All conventions in Southern Baptist life to this day, in Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, let's just say in Baptist life, all different branches, primarily when they meet, it's for two purposes. It is for fellowship. Well, that's really the main purpose, but it's also to come together and as through the giving of the churches, support mission work. You know, that's kind of what binds us, fellowship and missions. You know, but But you're in 1814. So you fast forward to 1845. There's a growing division. We just know the history. A growing division over slavery. We know that's a part of our American history. So it led to the dissolution of the Triennial Convention, and it led to the formation of the Northern and Southern Baptist Conventions. Real quickly, let me say the Northern Convention is now what we know as the American Baptist Convention. It's first called Northern and Southern. Yeah, some of you came out of that.
Well, I didn't, I grew up in when I was in Western New York.
Right, yeah. American Baptist churches today, again, talking about putting the pins on the map, would be much more northern, like you were. New England and Midwest, much more so. Very few American Baptist churches in the South, very few. Because again, there was the Northern Convention, now American, and then there was the Southern Baptist Convention, which started in 1845. That's again another one of those dates to remember. Southern Baptist Convention, 1845. Just for your reference point, and we'll get to this the fourth week, or maybe at least the third, but just for what it's worth, keep in mind, this church was started in 1835, before the Southern Baptist Convention even was created, which is something to think about. Today, the Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Protestant denomination in the country. So there you have that expansion. Now, the third week I want to talk about, for instance, this church in 1845 and many churches were Southern Baptists all their life until the late 80s, early 90s when there was a controversy. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about that in the third week. You really want to be here because all that is critical for understanding why we are a part of Cooperative Baptist Fellowship now, and what that means about our relationship to Southeastern, which is very much a Southern Baptist seminary. So we want to talk about that. But the alliances that we have now, of course, Southern Baptist Convention was the only show in the area. I mean, it's largest Protestant denomination, largest missionary force still to this day. But now, just as far as who we connect with, we as a church, we have a relationship with Southern Baptist Convention. We are primarily now with what's called Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And I'm going to talk about that in the third week. So I want to get into that too much tonight, but there's a reason for that, and there's connections and history to that. We are also a part of the Baptist World Alliance, which is worldwide. Our church is a part of that. And, but think about this. When we're talking about origins of Baptists and coming forward to this day, when somebody tells me they're a Baptist, you got to tell me more than that. There are 250 various branches of Baptists across the world, and probably about that many. Well, there are 3,600 Baptist churches, or give or take, in North Carolina alone. 3,600 Baptist churches.
I thought you were going to say in the world.
No.
North Carolina.
In North Carolina, 3,600 Baptist churches. Well, I mean, look at Wake Forest. I mean, really. Really. Now, and this is when I say, you got a question?
How many of those don't belong to any
Good question.
convention or alliance?
Good question. A lot. And that's what I'm getting at. Let me give you what I'm going to say, and that'll speak to what you're talking about. That's why I say, when you tell me you're a Baptist, I got to know more than that, because there are independent Baptists, a lot of those. There are missionary Baptists, there are premillennial Baptists, there are, oh my God, I mean, there's just all kind of Baptists out there. I mean, you drive the country roads and you see these signs, and I mean, it's just, there's just everything. So a lot of them are not Southern Baptists, and even fewer of them are Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. I'm talking everywhere, but certainly in this area as well. But to show you, and I'm telling you, quite frankly, it's true in this church. What I'm about to say, I could say in this, we got everything in Wake Forest Baptist. If you don't think so, just sit where I sit for a few days. We got politically here to here, theologically here to here. I mean, you know, I'm not kidding. But here are the names of some Baptists that you know, just to give you the idea how we're talking. Some of these are now dead, but all of these people are Baptists. John Grisham, the writer, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Martin Luther King, Jerry Falwell, Johnny Cash, Diana Ross, Gladys Knight, Pat Robertson, Jesse Jackson, Eddie Murphy, Billy Graham. I mean, nobody confuses, Pat Robertson with Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter or Jerry Falwell. Well, they might confuse Pat Robertson with Jerry Falwell, but or Jesse Jackson. I mean, so the point being that there's not this little cookie cutter, narrow little world of Baptists. It's just you got Baptist churches that are very much into social gospel. Others are very much into social causes. I mean, and others that are very much into evangelism. Others that are more into, you name it. So there's a huge variety of Baptists in the world, which is fine. So that's why to point out what you're saying, there are just all kind of Baptist churches as well. I want to come back into conclude going back to this religious freedom thing. This is the huge, overwhelming. Again, I'll just repeat myself. If there's one thing somebody says to me, well, what's the big deal about being Baptist? I'd probably say nothing. Although I would be sure to say this. It was us folks. It was the Baptists who were the champions of religious freedom more than anybody else. And that's just a historical fact. So the greatest contribution to the Baptists in the world. The Puritans came to America in part to have religious freedom. When they got here, and I'm just reading now, when they got here, they set up the kind of state churches they had known in Europe. We talked about that. 10 of our original 13 colonies has some form of an established state church, as they had in Europe. For example, in Virginia, we mentioned this, the Episcopal Church was the established church, the Bruton Parish Church that many of y'all have seen right in Colonial Williamsburg. What that meant was that the people of Virginia supported the church in the very taxes that they paid. But it also meant that the powers of the state gave the established church special treatment. Baptists could not marry or bury their dead without permits or licenses from the state. They could not meet officially in worship gatherings without the state approval. This is Virginia. This is Massachusetts. Like I said, it's 10 of the original 13 colonies. I mean, isn't it amazing? Isn't that something about our human nature, that we try to get away from things and we go right back to the same old practices? But in other words, many of the people fleeing religious persecution in Europe came to America and did the same thing here to others that had been done to them in Europe. Because Baptists were recipients of this kind of persecution, they gained a deep appreciation for what religious freedom really was. They came to see there would never be true religious freedom until there was freedom of religion for everybody. And freedom from religion for everybody. Very important. You with me? Not only do you have freedom for what you want, but you have freedom not to worship at all. You don't have to believe at all. It's not going to be mandated. What that means today is that Baptists want the freedom to witness and share our faith, but at the same time will fight to protect the rights of others to disagree with our beliefs. Whatever expressions of faith there are must be voluntary and freely given. I would hope that's such an obvious thing, but yet it isn't. And there are issues still coming up all the time of issues of church and state. And I always give the example, when I was in Marion 2 churches back, we had a wonderful family, good friends, moved to Salt Lake City. I went out and visited one time. I thought, and I think we all would get this, do you want prayer in schools? Well, of course, I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. I want prayer in schools, of course. Well, if you're in Salt Lake City, you know what your prayer is going to be. It's going to be a Mormon prayer. we like that kind of thing because we're in North Carolina. It's so overly Christian. But really, if a Muslim friend moves here into my neighborhood, which they have, is it really right for me to expect them that their child should have to be forced to listen to a prayer, a Christian prayer, because that happens to be the majority here? Well, only if you feel it's okay for your child to hear it in Salt Lake City, some other prayer, because you can't have it both ways. I mean, that's just one issue. So, when I say that, I think, I kind of see the nodding of heads, but freedom from religion, or else what's the point of your religious beliefs if you had no choice? So furthermore, Baptists came to experience firsthand the dangers of the state and church wedded together. So the Bill of Rights that we have in our country today, which again was influenced by a Baptist minister more than anybody else, it was Baptists who fought for the section that calls for complete religious freedom, but also for a separation of church and state. We resist any governmental support of any religion. Indeed, it is an indictment of the church. And what I mean by that, if you remember, for instance, back when George W. Bush, he had some faith-based programs that were being talked about that the government would support. Wonderful things. Many of them great kind of projects that be helpful to the communities and all that. And I remember when it came out, and trust me, this hardly ever happens, but the TV reporter had called and asked if he could interview me about it. I mean, I'm not a celebrity, so, but that was one time I think I came up with a line that I still think was a pretty good line. Because what I said was, which is true, I said when church and state dance together, state always calls the tune. And that's true. Because what George W. Bush, and again, it was hard to argue against those things because they were nice things, helpful things for a lot of communities, neighborhoods. But they called the shots. And if the church got any kind of support. And so when I say it's an indictment of the church, if Wake Forest Baptist has to get a grant from the government to go out and do something Taylor Street Park, what we're really saying is we don't have enough power and enough strength and enough resources as a people of faith on our own to do this, that we have to rely on otherworldly power, the government, to support and prop up what we're trying to do. Does that make sense to anybody? I know it sounds a little controversial. It sounds, nobody wants to be the bad guy here. But really, in our community, the churches, you put all our churches together, we ought to be transforming this community. The churches, we're God's people. We have the greatest power of all. And so we should never have to resort to having somebody else prop us up. And this is a huge Baptist belief. I mean, you're talking about the priesthood of the believer, which we'll talk about next week. We'll also talk about again next week separation of church and state. I mean, this is in our DNA. I mean, this is. I mean, if you're real Baptist to the core, this is in our DNA that we champion freedom from religion, freedom for religion, kind of thing. But it's a tricky, slippery kind of thing because it can often sound so good. Anybody want to ask about that or challenge that or just?
I guess it just sort of ties in with the whole believers baptism thing, right? So, like,
Well,
if they're going to be following you, the religion you want them to know what they're believing.
yeah, I mean, yes, and I mean it's certainly that's where we start with our own conviction of believing in Jesus Christ, and that He and God and the Holy Spirit are the powers that are ultimate in this world and ultimate in our personal lives. And so that's what we look to for security and what we look to for being agents of transformation. So in that sense, absolutely.
It really is a hard subject because, just the formations lessons past week, Barnabas, Acts 14,
Yeah.
talking about the relationship of the authority.
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
essence,
Yeah.
the early church.
Right. it really is tricky for those viewing that talked about Barnabas and the whole issue of authority. And the Bible says we are to pray for our leaders in government. We are to support those in authority and that kind of thing. And that's it does get kind of tricky. I mean, when you read that, to me, it's not tricky about praying for our leaders in government and all that. But there's also there's other verses too. I know. But the point is, even today, and even in trying to figure out what the Bible or what God's leading is, it's a tricky kind of thing. It's not. It becomes difficult because you're almost saying no to something that is such a good thing, But the message is that we're. George Truett, who was the famous pastor for years, First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. I mean, this is years ago. He gave the famous talk on the steps of the Capitol, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea that to the extent that we look to government to prop up the church, then we have given away the power that is ours, kind of thing. I get that. I agree with that, So okay, that's the origin. Somebody questions? That's a whole semester of church history. That's just a real broad. I mean, we're going to get more and more focused each week. Anybody have anything? Yes. Let me speak to that real quick because there are Baptist churches that do the same thing, and I've actually pastored one. And what is there are churches everywhere from our church which respects the integrity, I would say the word integrity of infant baptism as long as they have been confirmed, which we do require that of people from. But there are Baptist churches, many Baptist churches, that if you were infant baptized and confirmed, you would be expected to be immersed because the immersion is the ultimate all thing about baptism.
Yeah, I got that.
Well. And so the first church I pastored required that. People been Christian all their life. The big example for me was my wife. She was sprinkled as an Episcopalian. She was confirmed as a Methodist. She dated me and had no choice about what church she was going to go to. So the Saturday that church required you to be immersed if you never had been immersed, no matter how much you've been sprinkled or confirmed. And so she held out to the last Sunday before we got married. And I held her down a little longer because but there's also some, so you're kind of going more open-minded. I don't want to call it liberal, our church. Then you got that kind of thing. Then you got some churches right here in this community, Southern Baptist churches, who even if you had been immersed in a Baptist church, but it wasn't their Baptist church, that you had to be immersed again. And my dad was a member at St. Matthew's Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He was immersed in the Christian church, okay, but he was immersed. He was a deacon, and going to an associational meeting one night, he happened to mention that he was immersed in the Disciples of Christ church. And they go like, yeah, it wasn't a Baptist church. So he had to get immersed in that Baptist church because that was their practice. So you get a lot of that, all kind of variations of what's required for baptism. So that's that.
I've never heard of it again, so that's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How big a deal it was.
And we'll talk about baptism next week, about the doctrine of baptism for Baptists.
Well, I'm gonna be here next week. That's
Okay, well, we're taping, and you'll be able to get a DVD of it. All right, let's stop because it's just a little bit past time for choir members. So thank you all for coming. Next week we talk about Baptist doctrines and beliefs. Hope you'll come. So.